Welcome to the Fortuna MBA Admissions Masterclass of how to get into Harvard Business School. My name is Matt Symonds. Welcome. Harvard Business School volume of applications was up 16% last year. They almost beat their record. That means there were more candidates applying to Boston than any other program in the country, which also means that I guess they sent more rejections than any other. But it doesn't have to be that way. And if you get great advice, you can secure your place. It's a big prize, right? So my colleagues love to say, be real, but not perfect. That's going to be a big theme of the next 50 minutes. This is the first in a three-part series with Fortuna. We'll be looking today at HBS, and then next week Wharton, and the week after that at Stanford GSB. Why Fortuna? Well, our qualifications, I get to work with this dream team of former admissions directors, associate deans, associate directors. It's an extraordinary bunch of coaches that have helped thousands and thousands of individuals to secure their place at Harvard Business School and other M7 schools. Great scholarships along the way. And very often, multiple offers. That's the fun part, when they get 2 or 3 offers and we have to choose which one is the right fit. 2 of our star coaches are with me today. Karla Cohen. Karla was a former Harvard Business School Associate Director. Some of you may know Karla and the extraordinary insights that she has. She's an HBS genius, but that's equally true for Alterrell. Alterrell lived that 2-year Harvard MBA experience. He's going to have to tell us if it was the only school that he applied to. It almost seems kind of unfair, right? To just apply to Harvard and get your spot. He then worked closely with the admissions team, and he's been an incredible coach working with us in recent years. Karla and Alterrell, lovely to have you both with us. And I think we're going to keep you pretty busy, right? In terms of the agenda, that big picture of why Harvard Business School. And given your outspoken and pithy natures, I'd also like you to think about why not Harvard Business School. That's kind of new for a webinar about getting into Harvard. And then we're going to look at exactly what that school is looking for. And I said that theme about being real, but not being perfect. So we'll take you through all of the steps, the essays that we're imagining they're going to reproduce for this year, recommenders, outreach research, everything that you can be doing to maximize your chances. I said that we'd start with why Harvard Business School. Alterrell, 2 years there, 2 very happy years. What is it that really stands out for you about the school?
So what stands out for me, I think that, one of the things that I really enjoy was being in a classroom with folks who've actually done and been in some of the places where big decisions were made was really, really cool. And the standout experience of hearing from people who could say, I worked on this deal that you may have read about. I know that Karla has this slide of why HBS, so I won't sort of go into too much of the detail there, but as an alum, I think that it really is a tremendous experience, and I encourage all folks either to attend a class in person if you can, or at least look at a YouTube video of what it's like to sit in the classroom.
Now, unlike Stanford, Wharton, and other schools, Karla, Harvard in their application, they don't actually ask why HBS, but you read so many applications, you interviewed so many candidates that obviously were thinking about the school. For you, what is it about HBS?
I think HBS it's different, and we'll go into all the different C's in a later slide. But the key difference for me is that it's a general management program, and so what it is designed to do and does very effectively is it prepares you to lead and run an organization in a variety of different sectors. Many people actually who want to even go into government are now being coached to get an MBA from a place like HBS in order to be more impactful and effective. The mission of HBS is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. And so that comes in many different shapes and sizes. So they're looking for passionate people. And so if you're interested in, dreaming big, being in a big community, again, there's over 1,000 MBAs per year. So that's about 2,000 people on campus at any given moment, that are part of the MBA program. It's but then you have your section of 90, which is also nice too. So you have this intimate group as well as a larger pool to draw from, plus the alumni network. The case method is something that is foundational to what HBS does. You'll have 500 cases in your 2 years there, which demands that you are able to think on your feet, and essentially helps you make better decisions in the face of ambiguity and in a variety of different settings. And so you're going to learn from, as Alterrell was saying, people that have been within these organizations and have experienced a lot of the challenges that are going to be discussed. So it's very dynamic. If you're an introvert and hate being called on, this may not, we'll get into why not, may not be the ideal fit. The alumni network, I think, is unparalleled. The brand is incredibly powerful. I didn't realize that necessarily until I'd stepped away, how powerful it was. From the outside looking in, everybody seems to know Harvard wherever you go in the world. But yeah, back to the impact-driven leadership, they're looking for individuals that have passion and are on a mission to make a difference in the world. And the general management training has been, it's not just a factory for Fortune 500 CEOs, but there's plenty who, headline there that have been through HBS. So the track record is impressive, but those are some of the many reasons why.
You mentioned the CEOs, the tech entrepreneurs, the industry titans, and the politicians. I wrote a book that McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and others were very kind to sponsor about the Harvard class of 2000. Now they're about to head back for their 25th reunion on the 5th of June. Among them is the mayor of Lisbon. Carlos was part of that class. And clearly it was a great move for him. Karla was talking about that power, but it's not for everybody, Alterrell. And maybe that emerges with the case method. What is your sense in terms of that fit and alignment given the school's culture?
For me? Yeah, so I would say, one of the really important things to ask yourself is, do I see myself in this alumni community, and do I see myself on this campus? So when I applied to business school, I applied to a wide range of programs, and what was really important for me was to feel like I fit in. So if you think about college admissions, it's quite similar. When you think about, you have hopefully multiple choices. Go to the admitted students weekend for all. Don't just go based on the reputation of what you've heard. I think it's really, really important to sit in the room and say, do I want to be of these folks in the long run? Because there are some instances where I went to an admitted students weekend and I thought, I don't know if these are my people, and that's okay. And then there were some where I had a really, really hard question of, do I fit in here or do I fit in there? And I went to one of my recommenders and I said, here's where I'm really, really stuck. Can you help me think through the decision of where to go? I'm a little intense, and so I asked people who were admitted to HBS and the other school that I was considering to understand what their thought process was. But for me, it's really, really critical to try to understand how are people thinking about the decision. And that's just a little bit of leftover from the choices that I made in undergrad, where I thought maybe I went with the school that was the best and I should have considered other things. And so I think that just sort of has always sat with me when I coach clients. I tell them, think about not just the name. You have so many accolades from your resume. Think about what you want your experience and your network for the lifetime to be.
Perhaps the idea, Karla, of these our people extends to the MBA admissions office at Dillon House, and they're thinking, that this group, this extraordinary, talented, diverse group that we're bringing together, and how they're going to interconnect. So what the school is really looking for, there's perhaps no one answer. It's nuanced for each individual, but talk us through some of the key criterion that they're considering.
Yeah, it's a complex question. Part of what I experienced when I was working there was that there aren't, as some programs do have very defined metrics. At HBS, it's a combination of factors, as you mentioned, but sort of like you'll start to recognize it when you see it. It was about as specific as it got, but you'll notice a habit of leadership, a propensity to be comfortable in a variety of settings, whether that's leading at work, outside of work, in your community, and having a passion for or engagement with the community outside of work too, which can be challenging, especially if you're coming from really high pressure and time-consuming sectors. But those are things to talk to a coach about. But they're looking for, community-oriented individuals who care about things that are larger than just their hopeful bank account, I guess is the best way to say it. So something bigger than yourself, although you don't need to apologize for wanting to make money. HBS does do well there if that is a goal, but they want to see that you have a larger mission. And so with that in mind, when you communicate what that is, it should be real. You want to choose something that you genuinely believe in and feel passionate about. And the two questions I often ask myself in evaluating anyone was, do their answers or does their answer make sense? And does it sound true? There are a lot of people who are trying to essentially posture and become what they think the HBS admissions committee wants to see, and that's very dangerous. Many times people will start off a conversation with me and they'll say, well, what would HBS want me to profess as my goals? And I'm like, this is the wrong way to look at it. What do you want to do? And let's work backward from there. Because the worst thing that could happen is, let's say you're successful in getting the interview, but then you get into the interview, they're going to come at you in terms of like, explain your thinking here and talk to me about, this pathway and where did it come from? And I saw many individuals fall apart when this started to really poke and prod. And you may be able to get away with it on paper, but in person, you're going to be nervous and all. So it doesn't make any sense and it's not worthwhile. I think the best thing to do is really dig deep, talk to, friends, look for different models of success in the process. They're also going to be looking for evidence of, there's a baseline of credentials. They're going to want to get the sense that you're not going to struggle with the rigor of the curriculum. So they'll look at your grades, they'll look at where you studied, they'll look at test scores. And no one of those things are necessarily the most important. I think a lot of times people over-index on a test score, GMAT or GRE being, fully defining. I've seen plenty of people with almost perfect scores be turned down, and on the other side, people with great stories and really compelling, narratives for what they've been up to and why they want to do what they do will overcome a less than ideal or below average test score. Grades also are part of that equation, and grades in the context of where you studied. So those are things they also want to see, not just the same individual with the same background. So they're looking to diversify that section of 90 and Aldrich, which is the class, the building where you will be studying as an MBA student. That section of 90 needs to be as diverse as possible, meaning they want to have people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different experiences. And so there are certain sectors like consulting and financial services, it's crowded. There's a lot of people that are trying to get into HBS through those sectors. And so you need to be mindful of who are you competing with, and you're always competing with people that look like you. So if you have a similar background, you need to be mindful of how do I stand out? What is my difference? And don't, fabricate something, but lean into the differences and don't be afraid to highlight where your path may have been divergent or your interests may be different from the standard mix. It's very dangerous to kind of want to look like the quote unquote ideal candidate, because you'll lose the essence of the authenticity. So use plain English too. Try not to reference a thesaurus and try to speak in plain English and explain very clearly and directly. They tend to avoid, anyone in admissions doesn't want to feel like the wool is being pulled over their eyes. They want to feel like they're reading something that is genuine and from the heart. And so that's the other piece of it too, is that it's difficult to go wrong when it's coming from the heart and you're telling the truth. So long as there is alignment with the goals of the school. So you'll want to come look at where do people tend to go post MBA? What are their ambitions? What are the kind of differences that they make? Look for different models of success. And then as you're walking backwards into, explaining your goals and how you came to those as part of the application and essay, focus on the stories and experiences that are unique to you and that define you. The other elements that they're looking for is that they're going to want to see appetite and aptitude. So community engagement is a huge piece. Appetite and aptitude is another part of it that is measured by test scores. And your ambition. Is it obvious that you're hungry, and where did that hunger come from? And why do we think that's going to propel you forward to make a difference in the world? So again, dig into stories that help explain what's driving you, and don't be afraid to talk about things that have been difficult or if you failed and that's how you came to discover a lot. Knowing essentially what you don't want to do is also quite powerful. You may not have an absolutely clear vision. None of us have a crystal ball, but so it's helpful to kind of describe what in the essays as well as in different parts of your application in your short answer, when you talk about reason for leaving and whatnot, that can also speak to your appetite. And the aptitude to be able to set goals and accomplish them. And they will ask specifically for your post MBA ambitions. So then finally, it's, we used to joke that it was like, it's not a leadership school, it's a general management program, but leadership is incredibly important. And they're going to want to see evidence of that. And leadership can come in many different shapes and sizes. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I'm president of X, Y, and Z, or on a formal board. Those are wonderful things, to be part of, but it may not be formal. You can exhibit leadership when you are solving problems at work, when you're diffusing tension between colleagues, when you are essentially getting everyone on board with a new idea, or enhancing morale within a team. So there's a variety of different ways. We would talk about capital L, which is like very formal, and that shows up on your resume, kind of leadership, which again, it's nice to have that too. But many people don't understand that there's many other ways to also demonstrate and show that you have leadership skills and potential. So that's the essence of it. The habit of leadership, again, not just one big thing that you've done, but they're going to want to see that. And that can also be communicated through letters of recommendation. So the combination of all of these elements, essentially, they're going to look for high-performing individuals that have strong ambition and that have the chops to kind of handle the academic rigor and will be propelled forward by their passion. So it sounds very simple, but comes in many different shapes and sizes. And they're hoping to attract people that may not necessarily imagine themselves as typical students. So if you come from a sector that is non-standard for MBA, chances are you are probably more appealing than those that come from, in some ways, the more overrepresented sectors and different businesses.
Well, you talk about different profiles. You remind me that in the coming weeks, Fortuna will be publishing the next edition of what we call our HBS Deep Dive. We just published one for Stanford. And for the class of 2025, we've looked at the profiles of, I think it's 94% of that class. Where did they study? What did they study? The companies they worked with, the roles that they had. And we'll be coming back to this theme of leadership and recommenders in some of the later slides. But I did want to just come back, Alterrell, to the theme of authenticity that Karla really emphasized, and being true to yourself. Tempting, of course, to turn to these wonderful AI tools and say, well, there'll be no spelling mistakes. You write such fluid prose. Help me out here. But you can tell, right, when you're looking for that granular, authentic self, that's something that really requires a lot of depth and self-reflection.
Absolutely. I've actually been able to tell when someone was using AI, and I had to ask myself, the sentence makes sense grammatically, syntactically, it doesn't. Something here is not making sense to me. And while I am not someone who works in admissions currently, I have to imagine that that is a jarring experience to ask and question, who wrote this, right? You don't really want to put yourself in a situation where someone is asking, was this written by a computer or was this written by you? And so I'm a huge proponent of, to what Karla said, speak the way that you speak, because I think that the self that writes and the self that interviews needs to be in alignment so that when you're being interviewed, they feel like it's the same person and not someone who hired a coach to write for them. We don't write for people, we coach people to write better. And so you really need that alignment of who the person actually is and that authenticity, because you can write it. You can write a perfectly polished essay and probably have a good shot of getting an interview, but you will not probably succeed post interview because it's not who you are, right? The other piece, which we'll talk about later on, is that who you are in your essays and in your interview needs to align with what other people say about you, whether that be in your letters of recommendation or in other places. And so I know that there are some articles written about how many students are moving through college using ChatGPT and other AI tools. And I will say that I have actually seen writing that is maybe not the highest sophistication, but we've been able to work to get that person into HBS because it's an authentic and true story to who they are.
Right. Well, this is like a magic hour for me. And viewers, please forgive me if the slides don't match what we're talking about, because I'm so intensely listening. And I know that there's some great stuff that we'll be discussing. We're going to move to a slide that Karla first shared with me a few years ago. It was like a revelation, talking about the 6 C's of life at HBS. It sounds like something Michael Porter would have wanted to come up with, but
I wish it was
Karla,
vocabulary,
it's
but yeah.
best in your words. Talk us through culture and the other C's of HBS.
Yeah, I remember hearing when I was one of the first times I heard culture described while I was at HBS by Amy Edmondson, who's a phenomenal professor there. She talked about it being a culture heavy place, and I hadn't heard it, talked about in that way, but I knew immediately what she meant. I mean, there's something about like this feel at HBS. It's an energy that is there, and I think that it's this combination of this fairy tale campus. It's not just one building, it's 40 plus buildings across 40 acres. There's really nothing like it. And so it's overwhelming in some ways, but it also demands, I think, it's very formal. I think in a lot of different settings, it doesn't mean that you can't have fun or relax, but it's a serious place. And I think, you kind of feel that when you walk on campus. It's also a residential campus to a large degree. Not everyone lives on campus, but the vast majority of individuals do. Alterrell, I don't know where were you in Soldiers Field? Were you on campus in a
I
dorm or?
was. I was in Soldiers Field the first year and then a dorm the second year.
Yeah. So, and these are not regular dorms. The dorms have, I mean,
They're
it's
much
absolutely
nicer than what I've experienced prior.
right. Yeah. It's stunning. It's stunning. And I think it attracts, again, individuals who are inspired by that. Mentioning the campus too, but the culture that sort of spawns from this campus, I think there are people who are really active. So when you think about your resume and activities, a lot of times I have people like, not to again invent anything, but there's so much that they're interested in when it comes to looking at you. And so when you're creating a resume, it's not like you're applying to a job. They're looking to have you be part of the family, essentially. You're going to be living on campus, and what are you going to be participating in? So the community is going to be, again, they're attracting and they're going to value individuals who participate outside the classroom. Look at the clubs, look at the different activities that they have. I was overwhelmed. I remember the first time I was walking around when it was club day, and there was this, music playing, and then there's art, and then there's, you're walking around, in that area between Spangler and Aldrich. And it was absolutely just inspiring. I was like, oh, I wish I could go back in time and do this. It was really pretty cool. But I was surprised by the breadth of interest. And so, again, it's like they're looking for people who are passionate about a variety of different things. And also, what will you contribute to that? Are you going to be part of that? And not that you need to, again, like maybe one of my clients last year, pickleball has been pretty popular, and it was like, there's no pickleball club. And it's like, well, we can talk about potentially doing that, and maybe you can be my coach or so. Anyway, so there's a lot. The curriculum too, as we talked about before, the case method also demands that you are someone who's not afraid to speak up. So it's like a lively social place. Not that they aren't, they need they're introverts too, but it is the vast majority of individuals who are at HBS tend to be more extroverted or want to be challenged in that way. So engaging with a lot of what the campus has to offer, the community, the many different buildings have. I mean, you have Claremont Hall now, which is like basically you could have a symphony orchestra play there and be drooling over the setting. So really stunning sort of campus and community on the surface. So the clubs are also a place where you can really shine. Back to the case method with the cold calls, that is something that I think is, I don't know. I think other programs do have some case method, but it's different at HBS. And Alterrell, you've experienced it. I've witnessed it. And so it's a good idea, as you said, to watch some videos and get a sense of what it really means and why that is such a formative part of your process. But I don't know how many times you went to the classroom, but you're not supposed to be late. You need to be in your seat. And when you get that call, you need to be able to think on your feet, and you got your community of peers around you. So, you want to make your professor proud, but you can explain more about what that feels like. But it's a different aspect of what it's like to be at HBS, and that doesn't exist everywhere.
It feels like, I mean, also, do you remember the first time that you were cold called?
That's a good question. I've been cold called at least 3 or 4 times. I want to say it was in a leadership class about Bridgewater, the financial services firm, and asking if I would want to work there. And the guests were in our classroom, and so I had to share my opinion about that in front of them, which was quite interesting. I would say two stories I want to share related to this page and sort of what Karla shared. So I went on a broader trip in my EC year with a few other classmates. We went to a few different places in Southern and Eastern Africa, and I was reading this book called "Quiet: The Power of Introversion" by Susan Cain, and I realized in that moment, oh my goodness, I truly am an introvert because this trip for 29 days with four other HBS people through Mount Kilimanjaro, multiple countries, has actually been kind of overwhelming and mentally exhausting. And there's a whole chapter about HBS, which I think is pretty true to form. And so what I'll say is, I think that HBS is very much a extrovert's heaven. At the same time, as somebody who does like to observe, sitting in the classroom and hearing what other people have to say, and then finding the moment to speak up is a place where introverts whose strength is planning and observing can work as well. It's
Mhm.
just you have to be prepared that you are going to be around some very outgoing people. And so while you don't have to be one particular way, you do need to accept that most of your peers are hyper extroverted, and that if that isn't energizing or at least something that you want to approach with curiosity, it may be a program that you might find particularly challenging. The second story that I'll share is when we were climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, we did exactly what is emblematic of HBS culture and the curriculum that we learned. We had a norming conversation. It was the day before our summit. We asked the question, do we want to just make it to the summit or do we want to get there in time for the sunrise? We had been hiking into sort of groups of faster group of six, a slower group of three, and we had to have a conversation. We took a poll of what we wanted to do. There were conversations. And that is a tool that you learn in the HBS classroom is around norming. We also have a simulation, our first year, I don't know if it's still there, around climbing Mount Everest. And so we really just leaned into the culture and the curriculum that we were familiar with as second years that we learned in our first year to have a conversation to get on the same page. So I think that what Karla was mentioning about culture and curriculum and how pervasive it is really shines through even when you're on those trips to foreign places with your peers.
It's going to serve you in the boardroom and on the mountain slopes and the playing fields and beyond.
Yeah.
It's and again, you both emphasized where we go next, and this idea of being real. That level of self-awareness about perhaps your own personality traits. An interesting one to me on this, Karla, is the sense of vulnerability, because you said earlier, falling into this trap of what does HBS want to hear? What am I supposed to say? And no doubt so many candidates that just want to shine and everything looks perfect. But that sense of vulnerability, again, no doubt conveys that sense of being real.
For sure. I mean, I think just imagine the challenge of the admissions readers when you have thousands, but in a given week, hundreds of applications to go through. And you can almost tell when you get, to the end of the first paragraph, it's like, oh, here we go. It's like not a real, it's very cliche. And it's like they always knew exactly what they wanted to do and everything always worked out and life was always wonderful. And it just like smooth sailing. And they always had the perfect like vision for what they wanted. And, it's just sort of, that's not really how life works, right? So like it gives you a bit of not only pause, but it's like, what's going to happen when things don't go well? If you can't talk about the areas that have challenged you or experiences that you face in life in a way that demonstrates vulnerability, that you are not perfect, or maybe you didn't see this coming. And that's so much more interesting than it always worked out, everything was wonderful. And because again, you feel like you get a real life human there. And it's easy to reject a brochure. It's not easy to reject a human. So you want to make that connection. You want to be able to, talk about something that you've experienced that has been transformative for you. And so again, you don't want to tell all the truth to everyone at all times, right? That's what coaches are going to help you like set the boundaries around them, in terms of what to share. So I try to, mention to my clients that my role is to help serve in terms of the guardrails around, how much to reveal and when. And that may vary, from different settings, but you'll start to get a sense of it. But it is really powerful. And most of the most successful people, if you listen to any, superstar entrepreneur, and ask them about failures or weaknesses, they're going to be able to list them like that. And in many cases, those are going to be their most powerful learning experiences. And so, not to say that it's like a laundry list of failures, but in many cases, it's when have you been challenged? When did things not go well? And what did you learn from that? And then, what were the next steps that you made? Were you able to face it? Did you, have to rethink everything? I mean, some really interesting stuff can come from that. So being vulnerable, I think, is powerful, because then you get to build trust with the reader, right? If you're just flawless and everything always works out and it seems very cliche and it's very it's just, you're not going to stand out, and they're also not going to be attached to you as an applicant. It was so refreshing when someone was just brutally honest, in some ways, about this is why I decided to do. Investment banking was a disaster, or, and in very plain English, it's like, you can win them over by being real. Again, as long as it is a real experience, don't try to be a comedian. If you're not a comedian, I think that can be really tricky. So again, stick to what is really genuine to you. And I think, again, draw from the heart and think deeply about some of the things that have pushed you on the path that you're on. And why do you want to do this degree? It is a massive investment, right? So they're going to want to see some convincing reasons for, this is the pathway I'm on. This is why I'm excited about it. And it should align with what HBS is in the business of doing, which is producing leaders in that trajectory. So it may be that there's another program out there that's much better for you. So, and that's why some people may be turned down. So again, they're not looking for flawless, because flawless isn't real. They're looking for real with that potential, and that it feels genuine and there's evidence of success. And then when they get you in the room, when they start talking to you about it, that person that they're speaking with doesn't seem like a different human from, the person that they thought they were meeting on paper. So Alterrell, what you raise is critically important. That's the worst thing in the world that can happen, is I think many people will be like, here's how you get your interview, and then see you later. And then you're left hanging. From my perspective, when my clients get the interview, I'm like, we're all set. And then they're freaking out. But I'm like, unless you lied to me, we're going to be fine. So I don't have any clients that have won an Oscar yet, but that's not my goal. My goal is I'm not an acting coach. I'm here to help you get comfortable with the truth, so that they can come at you from any angle, and you can own what you know and own what you don't know. And you don't have to have all the answers. So again, there's been a wide range of what's acceptable in terms of goals. Does it make sense in terms of your profile? There's no one set rubric or algorithm, which is why also I think the computers have limitations, right? So they don't want to have seen you before. Ideally, you're going to have a new set of interests and goals that are related to the world that we live in, and the work that you've been doing recently, wherever that is. So essentially, don't be afraid to be open and honest. You do want to kind of avoid the cringe factor, if that makes sense. That's like the one thing where it's like, if it's too, so we'll work on that in terms of deciding. Sometimes it's important to go there. So again, no one size fits all, but I think when it feels real, when you read, it's just powerful. Like when you read an application and you read an essay that is genuine, and the person is open and they're being vulnerable, it hits you. And that's not something that I think, again, I don't know the counterfactual, but you cling to that person and you're excited about that person, and you'll remember that. There's some applications and essays and lines even I remember to this day from 15 years ago when I first started that have, changed me and have had an impact on me. So it's not necessary to go to that level, but that's what they're hoping is to see something different, so that they can not only stay awake, but that they can get excited to meet you.
Well, we haven't had any Oscar winners. We've had several Grammy nominees that have successfully got into these top schools.
I'm not anti, I'm just saying I'm not the person who's going to coach you to be an acting coach.
And with all of that, you also referenced Amy Edmondson. Of course, she has so much to say about the power of failure, and that would be great reading for anyone applying to school. Alterrell, you've already told us 2 stories to illustrate norming behavior and your sort of underlying personality. So show and don't tell, let the stories reveal. But in all of these parts of the application, right, it's not just the essays. That's one piece of the puzzle that fits with the resume. We'll be talking in a few minutes about recommenders. So a candidate really needs to have a sense of all of these different pieces and how they fit together.
Yeah, I think of it like a symphony, right? You know, you have your woodwind section that might be like your essays. You might have your brass section that are your test scores. You might have your percussion that are things like your recommenders for people who don't maybe aren't familiar with symphonies. And basically just building out sort of to tell one solid story. Everyone's a part of the puzzle. And ideally, you don't really want over duplication, right? So when I was applying to school and what I advise my clients on is thinking through how is there resonance or harmony between the different parts of your story, right? You want to make sure that your recommender is not maybe saying something that you wrote in your essay because that looks suspicious, right?
Mhm.
So it also reflects that you want to have people who actually know who you are as a person, who can speak to your failure, right? You don't want everything to be overly pristine, to be overly perfect. You really do want to have a highly diversified and resonant story. And by diversified, I mean you might want to have a recommender who can speak to here's how this person failed and here's how I coached them through. And you might have a perspective about how that wasn't a growing experience for you, but it won't really read the same. I think it's really, really important to understand that the readers have multiple touch points and they should feel aligned. What you can do as a candidate is make sure that you're equipping people with the right information and also that you're being truthful and that you're being honest.
We're going to move to the essays. For 6 years, Harvard had asked, having looked at the resume and the recommendations, what more should the school know about you? That's now a very popular question at the end of an HBS interview. I'm going to turn to you, Karla, because, of course, a new managing director of admissions at Harvard, introducing 3 new essays. You're not entirely happy with them, right? We'll start with this first one, the business-minded essay. Share a bit about it and what they're trying to perhaps understand about the candidate.
Well, I mean, again, I don't love that they're so tight. I don't love that. I also don't love that it doesn't give you a lot of room to be expressive and, as much room as I would like. So, but unfortunately, it's not about me. They didn't consult me about these before they launched them. Understood. It's not about that. But I think it's harder in some ways, because I do think that these tend to speak to, a lot of kind of like I worry. I don't know for sure kind of what the experience was on the admission side, but I would imagine it makes it harder to distinguish between individuals because it does tend to, in my mind, my theory was this is going to produce more, you know, um, standard cliche kind of stories. And so I loved how it was before when you had so much freedom to develop, and even before they gave you the 900 word limit, that was kind of came in just before they axed it completely and then shifted. So. But I love a challenge. And again, there were a number of individuals who did extremely well in this process. A lot of my clients who are going to be starting at HBS in the fall, which is super exciting. And so some, the same elements are true. So, how to the business minded essay essentially is your goals, essentially walking them through where did they come from and how does that connect to kind of like where were you, who were you, where were you, who are you now, or where are you now, and then where do you want to go, in 300 words with no one extra word in there. So it's a lot, and I think a coach can be helpful about deciding what's relevant as you streamline this into a cohesive narrative because it needs to make sense. And again, you can still dig deep here though, but it's a little bit harder than I think you have less freedom than you did in the past to kind of architect it as perhaps you would like to. So, again, thinking about kind of like your rationale, why do you want to do what you want to do? What are you passionate about? And how does that connect to the mission of the program? It may be a circuitous route. It may have been very linear. And then, you've had that pathway validated by your experience. And now you're, want to accelerate. You know exactly what you want to do. Yeah. So again, it's not it's not my favorite. I can't pretend it's my favorite. But at the end of the day, I think it does get the job done in terms of you being able to reveal kind of parts of yourself. So, and I think perhaps maybe those that are more vulnerable than others will stand out more.
Is there, and Alterrell, of course, we're already always very mindful of this, of answering all of the question. And sometimes even with the word limit that Karla was describing, they talk about, okay, career choices, aspirations, but there's this key piece about impact that you'll have on businesses. I mean, impact, it strikes me, it's a word that we can't overemphasize in your applications to these top schools. So what is it that you're looking to capture and for the admissions committee to then be able to understand about you as an individual?
Yeah, I think it's crafting a story, right? So when we think about impact, it's really important to think about what have you done? How have you gotten here? What's shaped your philosophy on something like how you think about moving forward? It could be you worked with someone or a family member or something that's really informed your worldview about why you want to go do what you want to do. There should be some resonance between what that moment was for you, how that's shaped the decisions you've made more recently, and maybe even a perspective on how you think that's going to influence you moving forward. I like to advise folks on thinking about past, present, future, and there being some resonance between that impact. It needs to feel genuine. And I worked with a client who talked about working at a grocery store and how working with folks that were his peers but went on different trajectories was impactful for how he thought about how he wants to give back and make life easier in his future for people who do that kind of work. And so it's really, really important, I think, to not just go with, to Carla's point, a cliche answer, but to think about for you, it could truly be that you had a really human moment that shaped you and what you want to do. And that's okay because it's interesting to read when it's your truth.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah,
always,
just to further interject, sorry, Matt, but it made
please
me think
do.
of, yeah, I had a client this last round too that, we started with when he was bullied and and how that was, for different reasons that also aligned with shaping how he wanted to change the culture of the industry that he was in to be more open and conducive to individuals who were like him. And, or there's other individuals too who I think discover essentially the thing that they want to change that has been presented to them in their lives, and a lot of it is like maybe very early in their experiences before they're working, and maybe comes from a place of like, wow, that experience is really difficult for me. One of my clients was like he bombed his internship. Is at the end of his internship, he was supposed to present in investment banking, and that really shaped him in terms of like discovering that not that the industry was not at all for him, but the culture in the industry to set him up essentially, so that he would fail. He froze and nobody came in to help him. But you read the story and it's like just knowing that like what he experienced helped shape him as a really strong mentor and coach for others. And that was really powerful. And it was real. And so again, there's different ways that you can come at this, and it may surprise you when you go through a lot of we give you a questionnaire. And so a lot of times too, it's like mining for gold, but sometimes you'll find these gems and it's like, wait, whoa, whoa, let's talk more about that, because that could actually be something that, this is a fascinating story that probably, changed you in a number of ways and had a huge impact. And how did that inform your next moves? And they would never imagine talking about that. But it's actually something that will give you, access to the heart of the reader. So, there's a lot there. But yeah, didn't mean to overstep
No,
there.
absolutely. These are wonderfully vivid illustrations, of course, what we find so rewarding in our work, and these aha moments, or tell me more about that and how it will connect dots and lead to other things, from the grocery store to the investment banking internship. And we talk a lot with clients about enjoying this entire process, right? It's a rare opportunity. You've been studying really hard. You've been, working crazy hours in the early years of your career. And now there's this opportunity, with wonderful, insightful individuals like you to step back and really think deeply. The number of our clients that say, just this opportunity and what it's revealed. They then get into school, so we come full circle. It's virtuous, but it just strikes me that the sort of conversations that you're having really take people places in their thinking and in their self-awareness. So when a school proudly describes its habits of leadership, it's perhaps inevitable that they have a leadership essay among these three. Sometimes candidates perhaps worry, I don't have the job title that talks about leadership, but both of you had described earlier so many places you can look. Perhaps, Alterrell, do you want to start with this one? And again, the individual and also the investment that you then make in others.
Yeah, for sure. So I think Carla also referenced this before about big L versus little L. And I think, we can map that to say, were you a leader in title or were you a leader in action? And I think that a lot of what's really, really important is thinking about the leader in action that you are. Most of us do not show up to Harvard Business School as fully formed leaders and who we will be later in life. As somebody who is approaching his 10 years out from business school, I can tell you I'm still growing as a leader. So I love the privilege of being able to work with people who are much more junior in their career and thinking about what this will look like, because it takes me back to that place. And so some of the things that I think are really, really important are figuring out how have you supported others and what has that looked like from an influence or maybe even a top-down leadership perspective. It's also thinking about what are the stories that have showcased the presence of making a difference. And so for some people that can be in your extracurricular work. So maybe you do work in your community, you do volunteer work. It might look like you are in an ERG, which is an employee resource group at your company, or it could even be that you have some mentorship or something that you're doing that is maybe outside of the lines, or maybe that is in the fine print of your resume that's really, really important, that I think speaks to who you are as a person, what shaped you. I had a client who spoke about having a sister who made some choices that they did to basically leave that country so they can be successful. And this person spoke from a place of, I want to make sure that I can go back to the country where I'm from so that my sister never has to make these two hard choices. I think about that as leadership, as, whoa, I was sitting at the dinner table with this person hearing about what they went through, and I want to do something different. And I'm going to architect the path of what leadership looks like to make it be so. It is just so cool as a coach and as a reader to hear people sort of tell you their story and maybe not even see that they're a leader sometimes. And you can say that is actually really juicy, really interesting, because you're showing, you're not telling, you're speaking about challenges, and you're also, I think, giving the perspective that your evolution isn't over, right? Like you get to see that early stage of the person becoming before they actually are.
Yeah. Yeah, well, with
Yeah.
great modesty and to your credit, you talk about continued growth, continued learning and leadership, and that sense of potential, Karla. We might be talking about the 2+2 applicants. Certainly, individuals maybe in their mid-late 20s. So the admissions committee really wants to be able to see the underlying characteristics and the idea that you'd show up.
Well, absolutely. And I think the other way that I like to think of it too is that they're looking at you as an investment, right? And so what is the sign of potential great investment? Change. It's the delta. How much are you able to change and grow? And have you demonstrated that? And you don't, as Alterrell was saying before, I get chills and I think about it too. It's not that you're a fully formed, perfect, and you've got it all figured out. Otherwise, you wouldn't even need to go to HBS, right? So they're looking for that potential change and how much have you changed. And it reminded me once I was speaking with a recommender who was really struggling with, can I really say this? And what she was describing is that like day one, he was like, we all thought, oh my gosh, we've made a terrible mistake. Who hired this guy? Like he didn't know how to dress. He didn't know how to communicate with people. He was, like in every single area, he was rusty, let's just say. And so, but then 2 years later, she's like, you look at this individual and he was like, you would imagine he's a VP. And so that kind of transformation was really, and I was like, okay, so tell me more, like, what did that look like? And she described probably one of the most powerful transformations. And so then you think about that individual, and then injecting them into community like HBS and how much more they might grow, given that access to the academic environment, the network, the knowledge, the tools, and the network to succeed. And it's like they're going to be just a rocket launch, success from there. So versus individuals who've kind of stalled, and so it's like if you're greatest, like success, or maybe you had a great success in college and you haven't been able to find that in the work environment that you've been in. And so you're looking at the MBA as a catalyst to put you back to what you were excited about before so that you can flex more on that leadership scale. I mean, again, there's many different ways to do that. And it also does come in many different shapes and sizes. I've had individuals who are like, wow, I used to think of leaders as like, people that you would have on posters on your wall, but discovered that his mother, who's someone who he was very frustrated with a lot of his life, had been very different. And he was ashamed of like, a lot of the things that she did that he then realized later were incredible signs of like courage and not caring what people thought and just doing what she was passionate about. And how, he actually like learned a lot from her about how she behaved behaved as like someone who just wasn't afraid to roll up her sleeves and do the hard work and inspired other individuals just by being, fearless in many ways, and passionate about the causes that she was committed to that made him kind of cringe as a high school student, where he was trying to fit in certain communities. And so while he resented her much of his life, he came to realize like so much of the skill set that enabled him to succeed came from this model that had been right there. And he was now able to write a lot about her courage, and that was quite powerful. So, and you can't make that up. The anecdotes that he had, the very specific like details from the different bumper stickers that were on the car that, he's like, we had one car to drive and I was like this everywhere, but it literally, you could feel it. And so again, I think like the truth is powerful when you recognize it in the showing versus the telling, like he would just detail, like zoom right into these experiences. And sometimes you launch right in with like a story of, a setting or situation or a phone call that changed everything for you. And then, maybe you were let go or you were laid off or you were fired or something like that. And so that conversation can be where it starts. And it's like, this is not the kind of leader I want to be, or if I have to solve this problem this way, like I'm going to do it completely differently. So many different avenues for great stories to come. And it really comes down to that, right? As Alterrell was saying, it's like telling a great story, telling a great true story, I think is the essence of it. So easy to say, a little more challenging to do, but, again, stay honest in the approach and then lean on individuals who can help you stay within the boundaries of how much to share and when.
So, I mean, we've looked at courage, we've looked at values, as you think about your sister and wanting to spare them the experience that they had been through. In 250 words as part of a bigger application, ultimately with these compelling and memorable stories, powerful stories, is it, I want to meet this person? Is it to then pique their curiosity and say, let's invite them to interview?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what you want to, you can't tell the whole story. And that's the other challenge that I try to remember people is that like, you want to kind of entice them to want to know more. I need to dig deeper into the story, or I need to know. I mean, you don't want to necessarily be overly obvious and leave them with cliffhangers, necessarily, but you want them to be excited about like, this person sounds like really dynamic and really interesting and real. Let's see if they actually exist or if this is fiction. Because in many cases, it was shocking to me sitting in the interview room to see that it's like, wow, like this person on paper is not the human in front of me at all. Like there's no way, who wrote this? Like, is this a real human or is it fiction? Did someone else write it? So there's a lot of people who do that, unfortunately. And it makes you wary as a reader. So yeah, you want to be real and stand out so that they're excited and hopeful that that not only you exist, but that you're going to be passionate about what you want to do. And then they'll be able to help unleash that in you. Hopefully that answers your question.
And no doubt all of these feed into the final essay, Alterrell, which is about growth. You've already referenced it, and curiosity. So you're invited to give an example of demonstrating that curiosity. What are your thoughts about this essay?
So I, as somebody who would consider himself a lifelong learner, I love this essay. I think that asking people what ways do you show up curious is really, really important, partly because it also mirrors what you have to do in the classroom. So you're going to be looking at cases where you have a limited amount of information, and you actually do have to be curious and ask yourself, how could this apply? What ways will this help me in the future? So when it comes to this essay itself, I think it's thinking through, how do you demonstrate that you are a curious person? And curiosity can come in different forms. It isn't always necessarily being well educated. It is oftentimes about showing demonstration. Are you the kind of person who asks people questions? Are you a social being who just wants to get to know people's stories? Those are things that are also curiosity as well. Again, working with a coach can help you shape what that story is. But I think it's really, really important to think through, what are some touch points for you around how you've demonstrated that, be it intellectually, culturally, or emotionally. Where do you go down the YouTube rabbit hole, right? Like, what are the things that really excite you and engage you? Give us something to connect to, because you're sometimes going to be in a classroom talking about a topic that kind of doesn't seem that interesting on the surface, but the thread of curiosity can also help you really figure out, oh, that's like these two things that come together and you're able to produce something beautiful. So a lot of when I think about these essays, I think about how does this show up in a classroom as somebody who sat through it. And I will say I'm really happy that the admissions committee sort of has essays either like this or the ones in the past, because when you're sitting there, you're actually confident that the people that you're being vulnerable with are actually approaching you with curiosity and not judgment. And I think that that is also something that comes across is, will you have somebody who will hear things that might challenge their worldview, and can they actually be open and asking questions about it in a respectful way? And so I think that when I think about this essay, I think about almost, are you a good citizen for the academic environment, especially one where all of it is talking? So critical.
Thinking about how the world works, whether you're an MBB consultant, a private equity associate, and in fact, Karla, this is just one of the many opportunities where you could look outside of work if it shows that different side of yourself.
Yeah, I had an individual who was able to discover that she was passionate about mentoring and coaching, and that was going to inform. She was, did an onboarding and developed a curriculum to help juniors in her organization, and found that that was actually something that she was extremely good at and found incredible fulfillment in. I mean, and to a large degree, I think, the best managers are great teachers, right? So this, I think, is also going to help you talk about a time where, where were you challenged, and when did, you have this, what are the kinds of things that you're curious about, and where has that led you? And hopefully it's opened up new perspectives, right? Because you're going to want to be able to see things from different points of view. One of my favorite cartoons of all time is these two kids that are sitting on a playground, and they're arguing with each other. And you zoom in closer, and it's like they're both pointing their fingers, and they're very upset. And there's this like box between them. And on one side, the kid is yelling, "It's a 6," and on the other side, he's saying, "It's a 9." Right? They're both right and they're both wrong. And it's like, if you could step outside your perspective, if you were curious, like you were saying, Alterrell, like, can you be a good citizen to be like, wait, why is this person saying it's a 6 when it clearly looks like a 9 to me? And again, this is just a very, I don't want to call it a dumbed down version. I love that cartoon, but it's just like the power of, what happens when people are forced to kind of like, let go of, maybe I'm wrong actually, and maybe I should be curious and go over to the other side and see what they're seeing, because maybe there's something that I'm missing, right? And so I think that kind of like, it's a metaphor for like, launch off from there and show us that like curiosity has opened your mind in a way that has been transformative. And so, that was one example for me where I'm just reading the Sunday Times and didn't expect to have that. I was like, it hit me and I was like, oh, that's perfect. It's a perfect metaphor for the kind of thing that I think happens in an MBA, is that it really will stretch you to challenge your beliefs, and not to say that you have to abandon them, but you may need to expand them and also be open to that. And is it possible to be both right and wrong at the same time? So really, really interesting. And I think you're right. Like, this is, of the questions that are posed, my favorite by far. So
being able to see the other's perspective. So your voice, the candidate voice, and the opportunity to share those illustrations and to tell those stories. But there's one other voice that will be included in the application. And I always think of Eileen Chang, who, of course, for many years at HBS has been a senior figure in the admissions office. Eileen would often reach out to firms that were traditional feeders and say, help, help.
yeah.
We have lots of great applicants from your consulting firms and banks and big tech firms. They've all got good test scores. They're all done well academic. We really need you to help us identify those special individuals, perhaps the superstars. Many ways to think about that. But recommenders really can play an enormously influential role. Alterrell, your thoughts on recommenders?
Yeah, so, as somebody who had to think through who would recommend me for the different schools, I had to ask myself, who knows me well? There is an urge to think about the most senior person with the coolest title. But when you understand that the goal is actually to be able to tell a story about who you are, it's really figuring out who is the person who really has the credibility, who can speak about your growth and some of the other things that you want to highlight. So it's about advocates, and really it isn't about just choosing the most senior person. The other part is, if you come from a firm where multiple people are applying, you also want to stand out by having more credible recommenders, not just the most senior person, because someone might have a really generic letter from a CEO, but somebody might have their manager say, this person grew and did X, Y, and Z. They tell very interesting stories also about your judgment, right? Who you decide to speak on your behalf because they are your advocate. I also would say, for me, it's really important to prepare your recommenders with context and examples of why this school, what do you hope to get out of this program? For some recommenders, they may have written these recommendations before. Some may not. You want to equip them to make sure that they're setting you up for success as well, and also that they're not saying you want to be a NASA astronaut, and in your essays, you're saying you want to be a firefighter, right? Like they need to be aligned. So it'll also show that you actually had the conversation with the person and explaining what your goals are. This usually in the form of sit-down meeting and other things, we can get into the tactics of it. But you want to make sure that there's also a good distance between yourself and your recommender so that they're not writing it for you. And it's not a duplication. It's really, again, it's that symphony piece of it's sort of harmonious, not duplicative.
Right. And any comments that we made earlier about it having that authenticity and being genuine? Maybe they're writing recommendations for several members of staff. I think if they're using AI, that's going to come across too, and all these Deloitte candidates will sound exactly the same. So that granularity, Karla, to really share insights and perspectives, given that close and substantive relationship that Alterrell was describing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think finding individuals who can be advocates for you, but also detail not just what you did, but the so what factor. Like, why should I care about this laundry list of things? Like, what impact did these elements have? Will open their eyes. But then with the critical feedback, what's the most important critical feedback that you shared? A lot of people, if you're choosing someone who's like very senior, have they really sat down and given you feedback that changed? Because they're going to want to see change there too, right? They're going to want to see that you reacted and that you did something differently. And again, they're hoping that it demonstrates some vulnerability and those growth points, which can be difficult for a lot of individuals to do. And so if they haven't really given you feedback and they come up with something really generic, like told them to improve their communication skills and they went to a Toastmaster session, it's like so many people have said that and they don't learn enough about you. And again, I'm looking for that growth of like, if you just kind of went here, it's like, I'm not that excited about how much change I saw. I'm not that excited about, are you someone who solicits a feedback? Are you someone who like always wants to get better? And so are you badgered by this person? Not that we need to go to extremes, because they're always looking to, could I have done that better? And, or maybe they were able to point out something that you completely missed. We all have blind spots, right? So, wow, that's not at all what I was intending when I went into that meeting for people to perceive of me. And so maybe I need to work on this. Chances are much higher if you have someone who's been very closely working with you, or maybe if you don't want your current employers, which they also understand outside of consulting, most people aren't super excited to let you go to an MBA program. So they understand if you don't want to talk about that with your current employer. So you may want to have a past employer who can speak to your transformation and the impact that you had on their organization and what it was like to work with you. And again, with specificity and that so what factor versus just they did this and then this and then this. And it's like, is that just your job or are you great? It should be clear that like you're great at your job or that you're at the upper echelon. And so a lot of people don't necessarily, they'll just focus more on the what and not the why. Why am I telling you all these things? They assume that you know the context of what it's like to work in that environment. In many cases, we don't know unless you tell us. So if it's not clear that you're excelling, and you don't have to be the best at everything, but they should be able to highlight where you stand out and where you're distinctive and why that matters, with respect to you applying to a school, whether or not, you're someone who, if they get their heart set on something, get out of their way because they will always make it happen kind of thing. And then, they could be a bit stubborn or impatient. And so I had to give that feedback around, that feels real to me. And it's like, again, does it make sense? Does it sound true? Those were the two factors I was constantly asking myself when I was assessing. And you don't always know for sure, but when it is true and when it's real, it's hard to mistake that one. You might get it wrong with some of the more generic stuff, but asking people, early on, do you feel comfortable being my recommender and can you advocate for me? And do you have experience with this? They don't need to have experience with it to do well. And as Alterrell was saying, in many cases, it's like, gosh, I remember I wanted to like almost blast email all the McKinsey partners, like just stop sending the same exact letter about everyone. They're the best ever. And, it's the same every year. And then people get in. And so they're like, look at me and my great letters. And they do it again. It's like, some cases people might be getting in spite of that. So no offense to McKinsey, a wonderful organization, but there's so many that are excellent that it's just there's templates almost that cycle through, and you can almost recognize it from miles away. So you don't want it to be something that is formulaic. You want it to be specific to you, which means that they're going to have to spend time doing it. And so make sure that they're invested. And overall, like HBS and I think other top programs, I really respect them for not wanting to just reward connections and relationships. It's not about how senior or who does your dad or your mom know or who graduated from where and they're best buds. And that's why nudge, nudge, get our person. And that is not, maybe that would fly in the past, but there's an emphasis against and a hard one at that. And even in California now, legacy is, you can't use legacy. It's illegal now to factor in legacy as an admissions factor. So it shouldn't be about who you know. It should be about what have you done? What have you experienced? How have you had an impact in whatever sector, job, function, role that you're in? And is there potential for more of that, and to scale that somehow to make a difference in the world is what they want to see. So again, comes in many different shapes and sizes, but there's a lot that can go wrong. Again, I like to think of it as like plenty of people get axed with the letters of recommendation, and not very few people. It's like, oh, look who wrote their letter, let's let them in. That's not really how it's not how it works. Maybe it did.
But thinking strategically, perhaps Alterrell with two voices. If you've got a line manager, it's a wonderful reflection of where you are, perhaps in your current role. Would that maybe give you some freedom to then even look outside the organization for a second voice that can be complementary, but importantly, very distinct in what the admissions will then learn about you as a candidate?
I think so. And I think also organization can also be group. So you might say, let's say you work at a large company. If you're an engineer, you might have someone in the engineering group, and you might have somebody who was a stakeholder that's not in the engineering group. So same company, like hopefully different flavor of sort of who you are as a person. But I would also say that if you have extracurricular work or things that are outside of your core job, or maybe even a past employer, those things are helpful because they can also demonstrate knowing you at different phases of life that will demonstrate that growth, that curiosity, and the leadership. And so, again, you really want to be mindful of thinking about who your recommenders are and how do they play off of each other. Again, I wasn't an admissions director, so I might be speaking to what I think. But from my perspective, as somebody who went through the process, I was very mindful to make sure that the two folks that I asked would probably not say the same thing, and to let them know who else was writing my recommendation in case they needed to check in with each other or whatever it was. I was just very focused on making sure that it wasn't the same story.
Yeah, I can see how that transparency has such a great effect. We've talked about this word impact, Karla. Now, the STAR method, it's also something that can be of enormous value in the interview. You've done so many of those interviews, 29 and a half minutes. Okay, we'll give it 30 minutes, but it goes very, very quickly. That's maybe just one illustration that you could speak to of how to structure examples, perhaps either in the essays or certainly in that interview situation.
Yeah, I mean, this is helpful for all of the essays, all of the questions that you'll be asked. I think, like, not that you need to model every single one, but it keeps you focused and centered on it's hard to go wrong when you're telling a story where you're starting with here's the situation, and essentially then you're defining what was the challenge that you were facing. Again, it's like the arc of any sort of like great story. And then what did you do in terms of like what was the action and the drama that comes in, and did you test a theory? And then what was the result? Were you surprised? Was it validated? And so I think this can be a great way to kind of filter a lot of your thinking and different, experiences that you've had, and seeing how you might then choose. But to think in this way, that I think it's a discipline that is rewarded with having more succinct to someone who talks quite a bit. Again, I could use more of it, but it's powerful. I think if you do apply it, both your essays and even when you're thinking about describing challenges, your greatest accomplishments, things that the HBS application will demand of you as part of the short answer, part of the application, this can be a useful tool there too.
With our hosts, poets and quants, I want to be mindful of their generous time, but I could talk with the two of you forever. Maybe just one final thought on this slide, Alterrell, and of course, all of this insight, all of this back and forth and exchange is a great reflection, I think, of our work at Fortuna. But we're not being prescriptive here. We talk about stories that reflect learning, resilience, or innovation. That's not a checklist, right? Got that one and that one. How do I squeeze innovation? Yep, got them all in now. But again, it's really digging deep. And it's not just the biggest contract, but maybe it was the most challenging contract, whatever it was worth, but what it says about the experience that you went through.
Right. I think it's really important to think about your essay or your interview and ask yourself, what do you want the reader or the person to walk away knowing about you? And what are maybe your 3 bullet points, right? So that impact, what did you do? Who are you? How did it change you? I know it's not about getting a checklist through, but I think it's thinking about really the so what, You might tell your friend a story about what you've done at work, but when you're telling somebody else, you have to think about what will this person learn about me as a result? What is this demonstrating? So it's really important to practice, be it a coach or whomever, say it out loud. There's so many things that are activated differently when you are speaking it aloud and you're able to maybe even record yourself and say, what was I talking about? Is that
Yeah.
interesting? Is that landing the way that I thought that it would?
Remind me one story that I share. It goes over well at dinner parties, but it would make me a convicted criminal in Russia. I'll run it by you one time and you can tell me whether or not it's appropriate for my application. Um, Applying to HBS, and you've spoken to this in other ways, Karl, it's not this popularity contest, and because you spoke to 37 Harvard MBAs, it's great conversations if you had that many. But there is meaningful research, that sense of alignment and you're finding out about the school. They've been doing the case method for 104 years, so I assume many candidates tell them the case method, it sounds so cool. What do you recommend to just get that better sense of the 6 Cs, the culture, and how that's also going to shape and find a voice in your application?
I would say again, yeah, don't talk to everyone. I think that's going to be terribly inefficient, or everyone that you happen to know. I actually like to work backwards from LinkedIn in terms of thinking about like what would your dream job be, and where did they, how, and even entering things like Harvard Business School, and seeing who went through that pathway, or is in a sector or type of role that you want. And then even, potentially cold outreach to these individuals. You'll have a resume and there's a whole strategy for that too, but starting to build out, mentors and models of success. Talking, if you have a friend who's at HBS, get their input, but also see if they can introduce you to others that may share your values and goals and ambitions. And then that'll focus you in terms of being able to talk about people that will help you with like the relevant clubs and classes that you would want to take in your EC year, your elective curriculum year versus RC, which is required. So that second year, you're going to have a lot to choose from. And then looking at like the career services pages in terms of, where do people go afterwards, and who's succeeding. And it may be that, another program funnels people to the pathway that you want, more readily or on an accelerated route. And so that might also inform your decision too. But working backwards from LinkedIn, I think is one of the many different ways. But reach out to individuals, talk to people who, what do people really think about this, and what are the challenges, so that you're informed about what are the elements that exist within the school that are, happening now. And then maybe also talk to people who graduated from the program 5, 10 Alterrell years ago, and what was it like then? And again, I think be specific and strategic about the research that you do. Otherwise, you could spend days and days and days, and you don't want to be inefficient about it, because all of our time is valuable, right? So be smart about who you're connecting with, but you can save yourself a ton of time and actually get a ton of great intel if you're focusing on the right individuals. And I heard a lot at HBS, it's like, if you can't see it, it's hard to be it. It's not impossible, but if you can see that model of like who to look up to and how did they get there, and then even talk to them about, what did you love? What was difficult? Would you do anything differently? What, knowing what you know now, and you can learn a tremendous amount that will inform your trajectory and your decision making. So.
Yeah, we steer a lot of Fortuna clients. Also, I was thinking about, the clubs and activities that obviously were part of your 2-year experience. Maybe an individual that's playing a leadership role in one of the clubs that you would be interested in contributing to, whether it's a sports club or, the VC club, professional or a passion or hobby. Would that be a good connection to make, someone that's themselves contributed to the HBS community?
Yes. So one of the things that I did was I reached out to the clubs that I was interested in, and most of the clubs are used to fielding questions from prospective students, and will put you in touch with a member to talk about what their experience is like, that club, etc. I find that that was also a great way for me to figure out what was the culture of the school through the club that I knew that I would probably want to be a member of. I had a really clear idea about what leader of which clubs I wanted to be at the different schools that I applied to. And so I would say that that's a really, really great starting point of clubs, what your interest is. And, Karla did mention that if there is not a club on campus that you would want to see to create one. So I think that that's also really important as well. So maybe if you want to start pickleball, it's looking at what are some other niche clubs that people have started and saying, hey, I see that you are a club that, formed last year. Can you tell me about what that looked like? What was the experience of starting a new club, right? There's so much that you will learn in asking people these questions about how did the club come to be or etc. That will also shape, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? Is this exciting or is this not?
Do you remember Alterrell there being an AI club 10 years ago?
I read something. So as an alum, Jeff Busking had a session last week about AI, and he mentioned something that I did not know, which is that there's going to be a required course around something with AI for first year students. So there was not a club. I ChatGPT did not exist. You talk to people from different stages of life. When I was in college, there was no Uber. There are just so many different things that have changed. And so, no, there was not an AI club, even though, life has changed. That's probably for the better or for the worse, depends on who you ask. Um, yeah, sorry, I'm not going to go down that path.
I'm going to keep quiet
Don't have another hour,
when I
but
wrote
that's
a book about HBS, the internet barely existed, let alone ChatGPT. As we're wrapping up, Karla, and of course we'll talk about next steps, connecting with Fortuna, so we can really talk through your profiles, your stories. But a final piece of advice that you think candidates really, what are we? We're 4 months from round one deadlines.
Mhm.
So something that you really want them to be thinking about as they take those next steps.
Yeah, I mean, I think just reflect deeply on what are you really after and who are you doing this for? Is this something that, like the goals and ambitions, is HBS your dream or is it someone else's dream? Start asking some tough questions about why is it that I feel compelled to, not only take on, I mean, I think we're wonderful, but you're going to hire some people to help you put together these applications. It's a huge investment, right? But it can absolutely change your life. And if it is the right fit, and if you really do want it for reasons that make a lot of sense, and it can be one of the most rewarding experiences for us as coaches, and also to see you go through that. But I think first and foremost, like really sit down and ask yourself, like, what am I looking for? What do I want? And what is driving me here? And am I willing to put in the work to make it happen? And yeah, it's going to take, again, resilience, grit, creativity, and all of that. But you may not know the answers to all these questions, but I think, having the propensity to look at all of this honestly and right in the face, and be rigorous about it, then chances are that wherever you end up, it'll be the right place for you. So don't be afraid to really, ask hard questions, and the self-awareness is a huge piece of it too. You'll learn a lot about yourself in the process, and it can actually be a ton of fun. But be honest. Is this really what you want? Do you have a good sense of it? And if you don't yet, what do you need to do to get a sense of that? We can help you with that too. So, again, it's not for absolutely everyone, but for the right individual who's being real and honest and open, if we can make it happen for you, there's really nothing better. It's so much fun.
We describe you as coaches, but also a lot of people say, you are my partner. We had this journey together. You are my partner. So again, beginning that journey, next steps, the confidence to pursue your dreams. What would you recommend to our viewers?
Yeah, so I would say, you really have to think about, so what Karla mentioned, what you want. Obviously, you should sign up for consultations so we can help you out. But two exercises that I would suggest, right? First is think about the investment of a school. I want you to think about a public product, one that you wear on your arm that other people can see, and then a product that no one else can see but yourself. Ask yourself if you spent whatever the amount of money is, if no one ever saw it, would you still love it? Right? Would it make you happy on a rainy day? Right? I think it's really, really important to think through and then ask the question, does that public product and that private product, do they match up? You really want to make sure that you're spending your money in a place where you will be content and that meets what your goals are. And so, part of being a coach is putting people through these exercises where you can help them maybe realize, oh, I have been thinking that I wanted to do this, but maybe I don't. Or, if money were an object, I would choose this school. If money were no object, I would choose this school. So I think it's really, really important to have a thought partner to help you step outside of your own thinking and maybe even expose some blind spots so that you can make the decision that makes the most sense for you.
I love that. One of my favorite slogans for no doubt a very expensive Swiss watch talks about you never own this watch, you just keep it for the next generation. But as you've reminded us, this is for you, right? And if you get that deep sense of personal satisfaction and you can keep that on a rainy day, that's a great place to be. You also talked about reaching out and Fortuna. Karla and Alterrell are two extraordinary examples of this remarkable team that I'm so fortunate to be part of. This level of guidance and unbiased with the experiences that they've had and the ability to really tease out those stories, hold up that mirror, connect those dots from the grocery store to the investment banking boardroom. It's an absolute joy to watch this journey that our clients at Fortuna go through. Just for all of you, please reach out. We take these consultations incredibly seriously, spend time to review those profiles before so that the level of discussion that we can have, it's all about you and what you're looking to achieve at this stage in your life. So we welcome you to reach out. I'm going to switch off the screen, which I hope is going to bring my mouse back to life.
Wait, Matt, before you do that, can I just add, I would say that don't let potential pricing or things that you don't understand stand in the way. There's a package or there's something for everyone. Maybe you were going to say this already, but I've worked with a myriad of students who had a very small package to a larger one, people who had no idea that they could get into the schools that they wound up getting into. I would just say that the most important thing that you can do is sign up for a free consultation because the worst thing that you can hear is it's going to cost you a lot of money, but we can do it. Right? That's the worst thing that you're going to hear. So I would say, like, do not be discouraged by thinking you don't meet a profile or that you're not going to get into any of these wonderful schools. You really just let another person hear your story and tell you how great you are and what the odds are. Don't count yourself out.
I love that because it's perhaps not very commercially minded, but the number of times that we say, let's start, with a handful of hours, or we'll start with one school. That you may apply to 4 or 5 schools, but we can do all of this great work, and then you can decide on next steps, and it really does have to fit the individual. I want to make sure that we just take on board some of the many questions that have come through. For the longest time, my screen wasn't working, so I couldn't actually pull up the questions. We'll quickly fire through these. There was one that was for 2+2. Now, of course, those deadlines are just behind us for this year. There was a question about the 2+2 interview. Is it any more selective, Karla, than those that are applying at a later or early stages of their career and the admit rate?
Yes and no. I think it's for a certain kind of, like, they're hoping to attract, perhaps not the most overwhelming. So again, it's not that if you are in banking or consulting, you have no chance, but they're trying to identify at HBS in particular, profiles that are different. And so your odds of getting in, if you're coming from a very standard trajectory, are perhaps lower than if you are coming from a more, I don't know, entrepreneurial pathway or a niche tech firm or, perhaps something in cybersecurity or AI or, let's say something completely, outside of that, if you're working for a music company or in the movie industry or something like that. They're trying to attract and funnel and capture people early on so that they will even take more risks, with their career instead of staying safe, hoping that will allow them access to the top MBA programs in the world. So that was what I think started the program. So there aren't as many people applying at that stage. So I think proportionately, it's not tremendously different, but there are a lot of assumptions about the program and what is needed. And so, again, I think it's helpful to talk to a consultant to see, do you have the profile that makes sense? And then there's other deferred admission programs elsewhere that may have different set of measures and goals in terms of what they're looking for. So when in doubt, ask before you make the assumption, I think is some good advice there. Maybe that you're a coveted, there are some applicants where it's like, if I could create someone, I don't know that I would be as creative to come up with you, but you're perfect, and they're blown away, you know? So you may be surprised. So I think it's helpful that it may not be as competitive as you think, depending on what your background is and where you're coming from. So yes and no is my answer.
We did a great interview with Marcus, who's probably just now graduating, an English lit undergrad. He was a British diplomat. And one comment that he made to me, Alterrell, he said, in the beginning, you sort of start with, why me? Even, why did they select me? And it evolves to, why not me? Now, some candidates sort of say, do they take older candidates? What are the chances? One of our questions about applicants applying from Africa. There's a place for everyone, but I think with the common threads that you've described, there's tremendous diversity. And not all bankers and consultants, there are plenty of them, but so many others too. In terms of age, just thoughts in terms of the right time to apply. That's probably a very personal question.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally, yeah, sorry, Alterrell, go ahead.
No. I
have to hop after this.
No,
Sorry.
you go for it. Go for it.
No, so again, I think it's there's not a set age, but it may not be the best fit for you if you've got, if you're a general, essentially, if you want to use a military, you may not want to be with in a community developing alongside folks where you have far more experience than they do. That may not be optimal. So it's not that it's completely irrelevant. I think in the spectrum and you think of a normal curve, most people are, 2 to 3 to 4 years of experience, I think on average. But that doesn't tell the whole story. They want diversity there too. So I've seen people in their 30s, and above, even over 35, find success in this process if it makes sense and it's the right fit. So again, that's something to discuss. But I guess there's a massive blackout in Zurich over something's happening downtown Zurich. So I got to turn on the news, but
Well, we were lucky to have you live for the last near 90 minutes, Karla. Thank you for being with us. And I guess, Alterrell, we've talked about next steps, reaching out. We'll turn this all over to our colleagues next week for Wharton, the week after that for the GSB. But of course, our team, we cover all of those top schools, both US and international. There's a ton of resources, interviews that I've been able to record with both of these remarkable individuals. You'll find them on YouTube, you'll find them on the Fortuna website, but it really does start with people like this. So Karla, Alterrell, incredibly grateful for the time that you just spent with us. Fantastic session. Thank you.